If you watch American movies or television shows, this is what the country usually looks like. Not bad, right? I'd heated rivalry that country. Does that make any sense? Let me know in the comments. Unfortunately, an endless romantic mountainside and picture-perfect afternoon in New York City are not the reality for tens of millions of Americans. This is what they actually live with. That's whatever the opposite of heated rivalry is. Grandpa eating an especially phallic sausage, perhaps? I've been living and traveling around Europe for the past 10 years, and this is what shocks me the most every time I come back to the United States. It's not the guns, the GoFundMe pages to pay for medical bills, or the fact that we saw a senile fascist wannabe try to overthrow an election and thought, you know what, let's give him another shot. He's not a woman. These shock me, but what shocks me most is something that's been around my entire life. I grew up with it, and I thought it was completely normal. It wasn't until I started traveling and moved abroad that I realized this is uniquely American. And like mass shootings or inaccessible healthcare, it doesn't need to be this way. I'm talking about suburban slop. If you're new here, my name is Joe Bauer, an American immigrant based in Germany for the past 10 years, and I make videos about the reality of living abroad and everything Americans get wrong about Europe, and vice versa. Not that America gets anything wrong. We have a flawless track record. Just, don't ask this part of the world. What is suburban slop? It's a phrase I came up with when we were at the peak of AI slop being dumped into our eyeballs. Cartoon versions of your family or your dog is a king. So glad we drained a lake's worth of water for that. Wikipedia defines AI slop as digital content made with generative artificial intelligence that is lacking in effort, quality, or meaning, and produced in high volume as clickbait. Suburban slop, in my opinion, is just AI slop in our everyday lives. It's amorphous blobs of parking lots, strip malls, and roads that lack any creative intelligence, effort, quality, or meaning. And it's produced in high volume. Americans know exactly what I'm talking about. These are the parts of the country that look exactly the same no matter where you are. Gas stations, fast food chains, maybe a mattress store that's somehow always going out of business. These are environments hostile to everyone outside of a car. Nobody's walking on sidewalks if they, even exist at all, and there's an absolutely insane amount of space dedicated to parking. They're so nondescript, you can't tell where in the country they are. You might be looking at Georgia or Illinois, communities 1,000 miles apart. In Europe, for example, northern France is going to look noticeably different from, say, southern Italy. Suburban slop features predominantly in American suburbs and exurbs. Obviously, Europe has ugly car-dependent areas too. But what's unique about the United States is how concrete spreads like a virus across the landscape, forming a kind of soulless blob of pavement from one town to the next. Even in Berlin, a city with plenty of concrete and a population of about 4 million, you can see a clear line between city and countryside just by riding your bike out of town. If this were the United States, all of that green space would be paved over with a parking lot, and inevitably somebody would still complain that there's not enough parking. And in case you were wondering where the parking is, it's everywhere! There are approximately 2 billion parking spots across the United States with enough to pave over the entire state of Connecticut. Methinks there's enough parking. So how did this happen? I grew up thinking this was completely normal, aspirational even. You mean I live near an Applebee's and a TGI Fridays? Man, I won the lottery. The US wasn't always low density. We had dense cities with rail access. My ancestors didn't land at Ellis Island and take an Uber to Ohio. So here's what happened to the country. After World War II, millions of dollars were poured into suburbanization, fueled largely by white flight from cities. The car lobby jumped in and did everything they could to force people into cars, like lobbying for zoning laws that banned mixed-use development, enforcing parking minimums. They pushed jaywalking laws that criminalized pedestrians, and convinced city planners that wider roads were safer, even though they definitely made streets more dangerous. Case in point, pedestrians killed by cars in the United States rose 77% from 2010 to 2021, while the number killed in Europe declined by 20% from 2010 to 2018. But the arguable catalyst of it all was the 1956 Federal Highway Act, which constructed 41,000 miles of highway, the largest public works project in US history at the time. By the way, who even inspired this idea? Let's see. God damn it, Germany. It's true. President Eisenhower, who signed the Federal Highway Act, wrote a book sharing some of his experiences in Europe. He mentioned how a trip in the United States on the Lincoln Highway got him thinking about building 2-lane highways across the country. But it was Germany that made him, quote, see the wisdom of broader ribbons across the land. Ah yes, such wisdom, this is great. From there, we never looked back. Owning 2 cars became the aspirational norm with the suburban development to match. In 1960, 22% of households had 2 or more cars. By 1990, it was the norm with more than 50% of households owning 2 or more vehicles. The problem is, a car is no longer just a helpful tool for picking up a large haul of groceries for your family, it's mandatory to do anything outside of the house in so much of the country, turning your weekend chores into some kind of unintentional odyssey behind the wheel. Hey honey, I'm going to Costco. Zeus willing, I'll see you in 20 years. The average cost of car ownership is $11,577 per year. That includes maintenance, fuel, all the fun stuff they don't mention in all of those car commercials that just scream, "Me big masculine man definitely don't watch Heated Rivalry." Callback points. In Europe, unless you purposely move to a rural area with limited transit, you can, generally speaking, opt out of car ownership. As we have. We use that savings for travel, eating better, and giving ourselves a little more financial breathing room. Fun fact, a car payment isn't stressful when it just doesn't exist. Now imagine you're forced into 2 cars because, say, you and your partner work in different parts of town with no public transit. You can't move somewhere more central because that costs money too. And even if you could, your job might be in a car-dependent suburban office park anyways. You're stuck with a lose-lose proposition, kind of like choosing between a root canal or listening to a podcast bro apologize for endorsing Trump. I didn't know he was going to do the things he said he was going to do. How could I have known? Even worse, car-related fatalities claim over 40,000 American lives every year, about the same as guns, and it's treated like an inevitable risk of life. At least gun ownership isn't mandatory, but in much of the US, you're viewed like a leopard if you choose not to own a car. The US traffic-related death rate is 14.2 per 100,000 residents. In Germany, considered a car country by European standards, it's 3.3. France, Denmark, Austria, Norway, and Switzerland are all under 3. But even if a car isn't killing you outright, it's doing it slowly. Suburban slop keeps you sedentary, contributing to obesity and other health issues. Roughly 40% of Americans are currently obese, up from 19% in 1990. During that same period, Americans went from driving a whopping 2.14 trillion miles in 1990 to 3.26 trillion miles in 2023, a 52% increase. I always hear Americans ask, how do Italians eat all that pasta and not turn into car balloons? They walk! Walking is one of the best things you can do for your health. But our suburban slop has made it so unsafe to walk that one study found that although Americans make fewer than half of the walking trips per day compared to Britons, we are about 6 times more likely to be killed while walking per mile traveled. If there's anything Americans can rally behind right now, I would think it's not losing to the British. As long as suburban slop exists, there will always be naysaying Americans who come up with some trite reason as to why things simply can't change. We're too big, or it's too cold where I live for bike lanes, as if Scandinavia and Minneapolis don't exist. But I promise you, these things can work in the United States. There's a classic Danish example beloved by walkability advocates the world over, where Copenhagen removed a busy road in the early 1960s in favor of pedestrianizing it. The usual spiel played out. Businesses protested, people said it's too cold for bike lanes, but now it's one of the most popular pedestrianized streets in the world. Americans, especially its politicians, can't keep thumping their chests that the US is the best country on earth and simultaneously shrivel at the challenge of figuring out how to help people do what humans have done since we crawled out of whatever primordial goo 300 million some years ago. This country put 12 people on the freaking moon. You mean to tell me we can figure out how to get people walking on the moon, but not in their own goddamn backyard? There's an assumption that Americans just like their suburbs too much. The big house, the 2-car garage. So, that's just the way it is and it's the way it's gonna be. But suburban slop has been around so long, many of us are just born into it, like I was. I didn't realize I preferred dense, walkable living until I experienced it when I moved to Chicago after college and started traveling abroad. In the US, you're often pushed into less walkable communities because that's the only place you can afford a house, and home ownership remains a quintessential cornerstone of the American dream. A Redfin report found that homes within walking distance of schools, shopping, parks, and other urban amenities sell for an average of 23.5% or $77,668 more than comparable properties that are car dependent. But of course, once you're in that car dependent neighborhood, you likely need 2 cars to live your life anyway. That's not freedom. As Admiral Akbar famously put it, it's a trap. Now here's why this shocks me. I've accepted that certain places in the United States are just the way they are and aren't likely to change anytime soon. But I know in my bones that nobody, even the McMansion lover, looks at suburban slop and finds it inspiring. These are the same people who travel to Europe and come home wondering why we too can't have nice, walkable neighborhoods with public transit and long-distance trains. The truth is, things can change. Zoning laws can change, habits can change, spending priorities can change. Healthy, walkable communities shouldn't be a privilege for those who can afford them. They should be the default. Suburban slop robs people of choice. It steals your time, your money, your health, your independence, and calls it freedom. Look, I still enjoy visiting the US. I love seeing family, slipping into a greasy diner, and visiting national parks. But after 10 years in Europe, I can't unsee suburban slop any more than I can that mental image of Grandpa drooling over a heated rivalry sausage. Oh, Grandpa not here. Okay, that is the last heated rivalry reference, I promise. At least for this video. But not everything is perfect about living in Europe. So go watch this video where I share the dark truth about living in Europe that nobody talks about. Well, not nobody, but you know how YouTube is with the big dramatic clicky titles.